Welcome back to the Web Development Group's monthly lessons. This month, we're going to cover the software you can use to build your website at home. Whilst at work, we're used to the software being chosen for us, and there are many reasons that companies choose different pieces of software. When you're building your website at home, you've got a choice of what software you want to use, and that choice is very personal. Some people like using environments that have a white background with black text on. Some people like using environments that have a black background with white text on. And making that choice is extremely personal. So in this lesson, we're going to cover 8 different pieces of software, many of which work on multiple systems. So whether you're running Microsoft Windows, Apple's Mac OS X, Linux, or Unix, you'll find more than one of these pieces of software will work on your system. We'll start with those that are from the major brands and manufacturers and the most popular pieces of software, and we'll work down to those that are not as popular but still do a very good job at building websites. So the first one we're going to start with is Adobe Dreamweaver. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's part of a suite of software made by the Adobe Corporation. That suite of software is called the Creative Cloud nowadays. It used to be called the Adobe Master Collection Suite, and they had various options that were on tiers going up to the Master Collection. Nowadays you rent the suite for around £50 a month. This made some people very upset because you used to pay around £4,500 every 2 to 3 years, and obviously paying £50 a month is considerably cheaper. The problem is, if you don't pay every month, you lose access to the software. So you don't own a copy of the software from Adobe anymore. You rent it from them. Adobe Dreamweaver has versions for both Windows and Mac OS X. It's regularly updated. It works with multiple language versions. It specializes in the design side of building a website. So it specializes in making the pages look good. It makes things easier when you design things because it has views that specifically tailor to showing you what a page will look like when it's run before you run it, so you can make a change and in real time see what that change will do to the site. Not all of the pieces of software that are out there do this, and the ones that do, some do it very well, like Adobe Dreamweaver, some do it not so well. And so Adobe Dreamweaver is one of those big corporate pieces of software that gets updated fairly regularly. Some people love it, some people hate it. Very few people are in the middle. I personally quite like it, but it has a very specific use as far as I'm concerned. It is used for designing pages and not necessarily for coding them and putting code inside the pages. You can do that with Dreamweaver, and it is very good at doing that. It's just something I don't prefer. I prefer to use other things for that purpose. So the next piece of software is a piece of software called PHP Storm. It's another subscription-based title, so you have to pay every month in order to access it. The subscription method is becoming very commonplace these days. The subscription method of charging customers each month does mean that you're supporting and encouraging the development of the software, something that PHP Storm does regularly remind its users about. PHP Storm works on most operating systems, including Microsoft Windows, Mac OS X, Ubuntu, Debian, OpenSUSE. Virtually any operating system that's out there will run PHP Storm to some degree. PHP Storm is unusual in that it is very specialized. It is specialized into PHP. It allows you to code PHP extremely well as a result, but lacks support for other languages completely. So if you want to program in a language other than PHP, you don't want to be using PHP Storm. Or you want to be finding tools on top of PHP Storm that will work for the other languages outside of PHP. Whilst it does work with PHP, and I say it doesn't work with other languages, it works with the browser-side languages of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to some degree. And that's mainly because PHP is very tightly integrated with these languages, and it would be impossible to support PHP fully unless we supported those languages as well. It's a really good piece of software if you just want to use PHP, and it'll certainly make your life considerably easier as a result. The autocomplete functionality of it is by far the best I've ever seen. So when you type in a tag, it will close the tag, and it will do it in a way which allows you to add code in between very easily, which some autocomplete systems do not do. So next on our list is PHP Designer. PHP Designer is another specialist piece of software like PHP Storm, except instead of being subscription based, it's got both a free trial, and a paid version. PHP Designer only runs on Microsoft Windows or Mac OS X. The paid version gives you all the updates and upgrades, as well as not having a time limit on its use, whereas the trial version can only be used for 21 days before it prompts you and then requires you to pay to continue using it. PHP Designer is like Dreamweaver in that it concentrates on the design of a page rather than the code. It fully supports the code, but it concentrates on design. It has an extremely good testing system to make sure that the code you're writing is good before you test it. So as you type a bit of code, if you've typed something incorrectly, if you've missed something out, it has ways of telling you that you've done this, which are better than most other platforms out there. Most other pieces of software are not as good at doing this. PHP Designer, despite the name, also works very well with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and supports virtually any of the PHP or JavaScript frameworks, which is something that PHP Storm doesn't do. This gives it advantages in terms of catching mistakes that you make. Because it supports the different frameworks, it knows how those frameworks expect you to code, and therefore it can catch the mistakes you make a lot earlier on, so you don't run a piece of code and spend 3 hours trying to find a very simple problem. And it also, because of the way it works with the 4 different languages very evenly, it allows you to make sure that when you're designing or coding a website, you're coding it in a way which will work across all the different browsers very consistently. And that's something that you don't see with many pieces of software. Next on our list is Google Web Designer. Google Web Designer is a bit of a misnomer. It's not really a web designer in that it's not really designed for coding. However, it is extremely good, like the other 2 pieces of software that we've seen before this, at designing things, at making things look good. Google Web Designer can be used on Windows, Mac, or Linux. Originally, it was designed to help people who were making adverts for the Google AdSense platform. And it was designed to allow them to make their adverts in HTML5 and CSS, and with a bit of JavaScript tapped in. So it's very good at those things. The website for Google Web Designer specifies that you can use this piece of software on Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, or OpenSUSE. When it comes to Linux, however, I'd imagine that this indicates that the software should work on most desktop-based operating systems. Despite the fact it's designed for adverts, you can do most things when it comes to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I've certainly not noticed any limitations so far. However, it does not support frameworks in an integrated manner. You can add frameworks to the pages, but Google Web Designer is not intelligent enough to know that you've done that. Whereas the other software titles we've discussed
It's 16
are.
hours.
It generally does not support server-side languages though, so you can't use it with PHP, you can't use it with anything else like that. So next on our list is Coda. Coda is a piece of software built by a company named Panic, which I think is quite cool as a company name. Coda only runs on Mac OS X. It's the software which I use for web development most of the time. You can use Coda to program almost any language available now or in the past, and most languages which are new and come out become supported by Coda very quickly. As long as it's a language that could be used to build websites, you can use Coda to do it pretty much. The Coda view screen is completely customizable, and there are several highlighting themes that exist for you to try out. So if you want a black background with white text, or a white background with black text, or a pink background with orange text, you can do that with Coda. There's several themes out there that you can try, or you can create your own if you want. All the themes are free if they're downloaded from the Coda website. Other theme providers are out there, and some do charge, but most don't. Like several of the other pieces of software on this list, you can extend or add functionality to Coda using plugins or add-ons, most of which are free. A small number require a payment, but most of them are free. This allows you to add different highlighting schemes when you're highlighting your code. This allows you to have different color coding schemes, or allows you to support entirely different languages in some cases. So next on our list is Astana Studio. Astana Studio is a free piece of software that runs on Microsoft Windows, Mac OS X, and almost any version of Linux that's available. It's just been brought out by Appcelerator, and they've started to rename it Appcelerator Studio on some websites, and whereas on others it's still called Astana Studio. So you might run into two names for the same piece of software here. Astana or Appcelerator is built using Java, which means you can easily customize it and add plugins and add-ons to increase the functionality and support for virtually any programming language you'd like to use to build your website, and also to build normal software. Astana Studio is designed for websites primarily, but it has the functionality to allow you to build software as well if you would like to do so. I found Astana Studio to be too complex for day-to-day use, but for some very complex projects and websites, it's actually the ideal system to use. For exactly that reason, it is a very complex system designed to handle very complex things. So, the last piece of software on our system, or on our list, sorry, is Eclipse. Eclipse is like Astana Studio. It's built using Java. It's also free to download, and it runs on almost all the different operating systems out there, again, like Astana Studio. However, Eclipse is designed in a way that means you download a core version of the software, and then you add things into it to make it do what you want. This means it's extremely customizable, so you can add things to do almost anything. And like Astana Studio, you can add things to build things other than websites. So if you want to write your own software, you could use Eclipse to do that. A lot of workplaces love using Eclipse, so if you've done web development at work or have interacted with web developers at work, you may have seen them using Eclipse. And the reason they like it, there are many reasons, but it's mostly because it can be so easily customized to the individual, as well as being entirely free to use. So there's no license fee, there's no cost to using it day to day. And when you add that with the customization and the amount of add-ins and plugins that are available, it becomes an extremely powerful system. I use Eclipse for some projects, again when they're quite complex, because Eclipse handles it very well. So next on our list is Sublime Text. Sublime works on Windows, macOS, and most versions of Linux or Unix. It has one advantage over the other pieces of software on this list, in that it can be used to build more than just websites, like Eclipse and Astana. It can be used to build other pieces of software. However, Sublime actually has systems in place to help you build other pieces of software. Eclipse and Asana don't have those systems, so you're pretty much on your own if you want to build something beyond a website. Sublime does. Sublime will help you with autocomplete, with error checking, with debugging and things like that. However, you do have to pay for it. Sublime charges a one-off fee to use the software. It's not that expensive, it's about $70. The plugins and add-ons, most of them are free of charge, once you pay for the license, of course. You can use the same license on multiple machines as long as you're the only person using it. This means you can use Sublime on your work computer, your work laptop, your home desktop, your home laptop, your father's desktop, your friend's desktop. As long as you're the only person using Sublime and you're the one that paid for the license, you only have to pay that license fee once. Whereas most companies require you to have paid for it once for every device you install it on. So Sublime has a special name for its plugins and add-ons. They call them packages. These packages are just zip files which you download. You store in a special folder for them to be recognized by Sublime, and it means you can build your own custom version of Sublime Text very, very easily. And I mentioned Adobe a few seconds ago. Adobe also has this same licensing where you can install the same license on multiple machines as long as you're the person using them. So it's worth knowing that Sublime have followed a very similar licensing model. However, they've gone down the route of charging once for the software, whereas Adobe use the same licensing model but are charging every month. So it shows it's possible to do both. So in our next lesson, we're going to possibly cover many different things. I'm going to put the list of topics up on the Facebook group shortly. It should be published on or around the 15th of April 2016, but remember, I can only do this if you get involved, so make sure you do. It's also worth saying at this stage that these are some of the more popular pieces of software available for you to use. There are hundreds of software titles out there that you can use to build websites with. You can even use Notepad or TextEdit or any plain text editor to build websites if you want. However, using those can be considerably slower and not as precise when it comes to error checking and things like that. My choices and the pieces of software I've shown you here may not suit you. So don't be afraid to choose something completely different. As long as it suits you, and you get to know the software you want to use very well, and you understand its features, its functionality, and its limitations, then that's all that matters. Everyone's different. Everyone uses their software differently. What works for one person will not always work for someone else. So I always encourage everyone, businesses and individuals who are going into web development for the first time, to allow themselves to work with the software which they find the most comfortable. For me, I prefer Coda. There's also an online element to software and website development these days, where there are some companies are releasing websites that you can use to build websites within them. So effectively, the piece of software that you have on your desktop is being moved into a website browser, and that means you can access it wherever you are from any computer. There are a few of these that have popped up recently. They're very interesting. I've played with a couple of them. Some of them aren't really ready to be used, but they're out there and they're quite good. Anyway, I'm going to publish this now and put up next month's lesson choices, so you can start voting on which ones you want. This is about you, remember, so if you want something covered, you have to tell me. I can't do this without you. Anyway, have a good month, everyone.